The next ability we're going to discuss is actually two separate distinct abilities that we're just going to combine together. The reason is because the physical aspects of these abilities do themselves overlap. Of course, what we're talking about are the abilities of taste and smell. Now, with physical taste and smell, the two go hand in hand. You can't really have the full sense of one without the full sense of the other. Which is, of course, where we get ideas like if we're eating something we don't like, we'll plug our nose, because the fact that we can't smell it actually does change the flavor. It takes away a lot of the taste. It doesn't all go away, but we lose a lot of the ambience to it. We lose the depth to it, and it becomes more flat. So because physical taste and smell to go together, of course, the psychic versions of them go together, because, of course, they're simply like the beyond version. They're not going to go and create new, entirely distinct ways to operate. They're just going to use what's already there in a more advanced kind of way. So that's what we're doing. So, of course, the abilities themselves, the two are Clairgustatorus and Clairolfactus. Someone actively using the ability is called a Clairgustatorant or a Clairolfactant. Both fall under the same category, which, of course, is sense-based abilities. The primary manifestations are things like tastes and smells of psychic nature, basically. Like everything else, the definition of the words are two distinct words. The word clair, which we've established already, means beyond. And in this case, gustatorus refers to the gustatory ability, which is, of course, this sense of taste. And olfactus, which relates to olfactory, which of course is the sense of smell. So it's kind of hard for people to wrap their head around some of these abilities because of how they're used physically. Most people, taste and smell isn't an ability they rely on as much. It's not an ability that most people even spend time to develop itself. It's just kind of there in whatever form it is normally. So it can be a very difficult ability to develop. Like I said, the two kind of go hand in hand. You can't really have one without the other. And that's very common with the psychic side. You're not likely going to have one without the other, although you may not realize it. One may focus more on one than the other. Like you might smell it more than taste it, or taste it more than smell it. But just like the physical, the two are going together, even if you don't know it. So the two titles kind of can be used interchangeably, and they would be accurate even in their inaccuracy. So just to give you an idea. Now, how it works, like everything else, is the same, right? It's about giving you something to work with to give you something to understand, to learn, to discover, right? It's just using taste or smell to create the same end result. Now, just like all the other sense-based abilities, it is based here and now, right? So as an example, say that you smell apple pie. Well, if you say spend every summer with your grandmother who constantly made apple pies, of course, that's probably going to connect together that way and is going to have meanings like grandmother, family, home, love, safety. Of course, like most people, the first time you smell food or taste food, you're thinking hungry. And of course, that could well be too. But then, of course, that's hunger and that's not psychic ability. So make sure you keep them separate. Now, it is important to realize that if you're thinking about something and then you taste it, that is a psychic ability. That is Clairgustatorus or Clairolfactus, right? And we do that all the time in lots of ways, right? We think about something and then we can physically taste it. The hard part is that some of that is memory and some of it is the ability. So it does get a little bit of a fine line between the two because, of course, we remember tastes and smells just like we remember images. It's just that we experience them in different ways, so it almost seems more physical when we experience them, even though we're not actually experiencing them. It's just the memory of them, and that can be a bit confusing. So now, it's also important to understand that some people, of course, this ability, the physical side of the ability, is more readily developed than others, and that, of course, will give them an edge when it comes to this ability, right? There are people like professional tasters whose job it is to taste and smell certain things. The most known, of course, would be things like the wine taster, right? they can show subtle nuances, and they can distinguish where things were grown and how long it's been in its bottle and what region it was and what grapes were, because they can taste all those very fine, subtle flavor differences or smell them, right? So for someone in that profession, of course, the psychic ability version of it would be incredibly valuable because they could pick up things that no one else possibly could. But for the average person, it may be that you don't really see a much of a practical use for it. And unfortunately, most people don't really have a greatly developed sense of taste or smell. So a lot of things kind of blend. As an example, if you take Coke and Pepsi and you think they're the same, you don't have a good sense of taste, because the two are quite different. Even in their similarities, there's a pretty big gap of difference. So, like I said, it's a bit more of a complex ability because we just don't tend to do the physical side of it. So, of course, one of the benefits of it is that if you're developing the psychic ability version, you may actually discover that your sense of taste becomes incredibly heightened, or your sense of smell. That's not uncommon. And that can open up some interesting doors because, like I said, those abilities can add depth that other abilities might miss. Like, it's such a fine, subtle ability that you can get a lot of things that you would otherwise not get with some of the others, because it is just so minor, so fine, so minuscule, right? And it gets funky that way, but that can add a tremendous amount of insight and just a really phenomenal depth to what you're doing. So don't, like I keep trying to say, don't undermine any one ability, right? Everything leads to other things, if nothing else, and that ability does open doors that can make you go to places that you just never could otherwise. So even though it's an ability we don't physically use as consciously or as directly as some of the others, it still has a lot of practical use. It's just a matter, like everything else, of training it, of learning how to build on it. That's the bulk of it. So that's basically psychic smell and taste in a nutshell.